Hello, Minnesota, and welcome back to the Tony Hernandez Show. I'm your host, Tony Hernandez. It's a blustery, wintry day here in Minnesota, but it's a lot warmer than what it's been, so I'll take the snow over the cold any day. Happy belated Valentine's Day. I hope you had a great day yesterday. We have an incredible show today. We have on a guest. His name is Rob Farnsworth. He's running to be the next governor in the great state of Minnesota, so we're going to bring him on in a little bit. And then we're going to have Sam Wayne Pierce on later in the show, and we're going to be talking about U.S. presidential history and who our favorite and worst presidents were and the ones that had the biggest impact. We're going to talk about first ladies, all in honor of President's Day. And we're also going to hit on some of the news, the local news that's hitting. Just a reminder, we broadcast live every Saturday from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock from SCC Television Studios in White Bear Lake. We also replay on SPNN, and our YouTube channel is Tony Hernandez MN. Tell your friends, tell your family about the show, and we always thank you, and we're appreciative of our audience out there. So with that, I'm going to bring on our first guest, Mr. Rob Farnsworth. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, and how's the driving out there in the Minnesota roads?
It's interesting. It was a long drive up from Egan, and I have to go up to Hibbing afterwards, so...
Yeah, you have to be really careful out there. My wife and Max, who you saw over there, we were driving through Spaghetti Junction on the way here, and we were going right through, and I hit a patch of ice, and I could feel it moving. And a couple miles down, I saw somebody in the ditch, so just make sure that everybody's driving careful, especially you. You've been all over the state campaigning. When did you declare your candidacy for the governorship?
We announced our candidacy on August 21st, the day before the state fair. And, we thought, I'm from Hibbing, I'm a teacher from Hibbing, so a lot of people around the state don't know me. So what's the best way to get the most press coverage? We thought, hey, we'll announce before that state fair, and pretty much everybody, all of the press in Minnesota are at the state fair, so that worked pretty well. So we've been running around the state from International Falls to Mankato to Rochester ever since.
Nice. So. Well, we're on your website here right now. It's robfarnsworth.org. Dallas, if you could pop that up. And if it's all right with you, I'm going to play your campaign video here. It's a minute and a half, so I think this will help people to get to know a little bit more about who Rob Farnsworth is. And if we can line up this video and play it right now.
Hello, Minnesota. I'm Rob Farnsworth, and I'd like to be your next governor. This is my family, and we live here in Hibbing. I'm a special education teacher. My wife's a nurse. We're a middle-class family, and we work hard to provide for our kids. I want to raise my kids in Minnesota. I want them to go to school here. I want them to work here. And I want my grandchildren to be born here, but I'm not sure that's going to be possible. With our high taxes and over-regulation, it won't be easy for my kids to find a job. With the cost of college constantly going up, a good education will be more difficult to attain for the next generation. I'm running for governor to fix those problems. I will fight to reduce the tax burden and over-regulation in Minnesota, make Minnesota the most welcoming state to create and keep good jobs. I'll fight to reform education so that our kids are taught usable skills and are ready for life after high school. And I'll fight for the principles of freedom and personal responsibilities that have made our state great. I will stand for the people of Minnesota, people like my family, and with your help, we can keep Minnesota great.
Okay, so that's your campaign video there. First of all, beautiful family.
Thank you. That's the real thing. We didn't hire any models or anything. It's hard to believe that beautiful woman would marry me, but yep, that's the real family.
We're both very blessed men too. My wife being a nurse, so I'm sure your wife shares many of the same characteristics as my wife being a nurse. Compassionate and generous and kind
and willing to overlook a lot of flaws.
Where did you take this video? It's a beautiful setting.
Oh, that's one of the city parks in Hibbing. So it was an interesting, we knew that we were going to run, but because of campaign finance rules, you have a certain amount of days from when you start spending money to when you have to declare candidacy. So we had to film that really quick. and then get everything all ready for the campaign on the 21st. So.
And you're a younger guy. Do you mind telling everyone how old you are?
35.
35 years old.
Yes.
You're running for to be the next governor of Minnesota.
Yes. Yeah.
What is it that possessed you, or what is it that motivates you? I mean, we saw a little bit in your video here, but you can't just make this decision on a whim. I'd imagine you put a lot of time and thought and prayer and consultation into this type of a decision. And I mean, when you say that you think Minnesota's heading in the wrong direction, you worry for your kids and your grandkids.
Yep.
I mean, you probably say, well, there'll be a lack of jobs and there'll be the other things, but can you try to describe a little more about, if we continue on this path, what you see Minnesota being like in 20 years?
Pretty much in every direction. You mentioned taxes, and the tax burden is too high. When my kids go to college, what incentive would there be for them to stay in Minnesota so that my grandkids are born here? When they want to raise a family here, how is the cost of living going to be impacted? Because of the Minnesota 2020 bill, the cost of electricity has doubled in the last 12 years. And that's a burden that people shouldn't have to bear just because there's one group of people that happens to believe a theory. And it is a theory, by the way. I'm from the Iron Range, and we have this opportunity with the polymet mine, with the twin metals mines. We have this opportunity to have hundreds of good jobs. And for elite environmentalists in Minneapolis and St. Paul to try and stop that so that northern Minnesota would remain their playground, it's scary. I remember, I've told this story to a number of people now. I remember in 1985, my dad was a miner. He worked in the mines for 33 years. In 1985, he was laid off for 2 years, and there was a time where we had half a jar of peanut butter and some stale bread, and that's all we had to eat. And yet people down here in the cities, these environmentalists will try and stop good jobs from coming to northern Minnesota. Those are the sorts of things that concern me. As far as my children being able to continue in a state like this if we don't change it.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little more, too, about your childhood, just so people can get to know you a little better. You said you're from the Iron Range. Which city were you born in?
I actually was born when my dad was in the Air Force. So I was born in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Okay. Moved up to the Iron Range when I was, I think, about 4 months old. I don't really remember it.
About Max's age then.
Yeah. My dad got a job at the time it was called Inland Steel, then it changed to ISPAT. Currently I think it's called Mattel. It's a number of different owners. He worked there for 33 years. Grew up in Chisholm, graduated from Chisholm. Went to college at St. Thomas, got my master's degree from Mankato, and now I'm a special ed teacher in Hibbing.
And so you're right around the same age as me, too. So we grew up in the heart of the 80s and the early 90s. And, it was before the age of the video games like we have them now. So what did you do as a kid for fun? Did you play outside a lot?
If Dad was home, we were outside. There was no playing inside when my dad was home. And when my dad was home, then of course we could sneak down and watch TV. But yeah, we had the original Nintendo, we had an Atari, but usually I was on my bike during the summer, and even before summer, from April 1st until the snow flew, I was on my bike around town. So.
Did you have jobs as a young kid, or were your parents more just go to school and focus on that?
In 3rd grade I got a paper route. And I had a paper route until 9th grade, and then in 10th grade I got my first real job, which was at Renke's Chisholm Bakery in Chisholm, and I did that for a few years, and I went to work at a grocery store. The interesting thing, actually, that my experience at Renke's has sort of molded my thoughts on the minimum wage. There's a lot of people pushing for the minimum wage, and when I got that job, the minimum wage was $4.25 an hour. And Mark, the owner, said, we can't afford to pay you more than that. We're going to pay you $4.35. That extra 10 cents is just so that you know that we value what you do here. If he had to pay me $2.25 an hour more, I wouldn't have had that job. They would have done it, or they'd have had the other employees, do the cleaning up that I did. And so that's one of the things that has shaped my thoughts on the minimum wage, that job in one small business in one small town of Minnesota, if you extrapolate that across all of Minnesota to every small town and medium-sized town and large town, that's an awful lot of jobs that kids and young people, college students, aren't going to have.
Well, yeah, if you look at teenage unemployment, I'm not quite sure what the figure is exactly in Minnesota, but nationally you're looking in the high 20s of teenage unemployment. And then if you break it down by race or ethnicity, African Americans and Hispanic Americans, the unemployment rate for teenagers comes closer to 50%.
Yeah.
And that is a concern that economists have, is that if you raise the minimum wage, you're actually going to be taking away more jobs from teenagers who, like you said, when you were younger, you were probably had the pride of getting a paycheck and
Yep.
learning the responsibility of showing up to work on time. Like, those are all great things that you can't, like life lessons that you can't put a wage on per se. What about the living wage for adults, though? There are a lot of adults who earn minimum wage or close to, and they're raising a family on this type of a wage, or they're trying to, and they need to have their sons or daughters work, or they have other people in the house helping to contribute. Are you in favor of raising the minimum wage for adults, if there's something in there that would allow that not to be raised for teenagers?
I wouldn't say that I am, because it's counterproductive. If you take a single mom that works at Walmart and say she's currently working there for minimum wage, which almost nobody at Walmart is, that's kind of the worst kept secret. Most of the people at Walmart make more than minimum wage. But say she's making minimum wage, and the state of Minnesota says now you have to pay this person and everybody else $2.25 an hour more. The reality is Walmart made $20 billion last year, and they're going to make $20 billion next year, and they're going to make $20 billion this year. They're not going to say, well, Minnesota raised the minimum wage, so we're just going to absorb that because we're kind. No, they have to answer to their shareholders. So they're going to pass those costs on in either the form of raising prices or getting rid of employees or cutting hours. So that single mom that we're trying to help by raising the minimum wage maybe is going to work 3 or 4 less hours and have to pay more for the goods that she has to buy for her kids. So it's not going to help in the long run, but the people that it's going to hurt are the middle class people, because their prices are going to go up. So it's not going to help the people it's supposed to help, and it's actually going to hurt some people. The best thing that we can do for pretty much everybody in Minnesota is reform education so that our kids walk out of high school with a degree that they can actually use.
Mm-hmm. So is that your answer then? I mean, let me just clarify, because there's a lot of people here in St. Paul that want to see the minimum wage raised, and it's a very, very important issue. So are you against people making more money?
I'm in favor of people making more money. I'm not in favor of the government telling private businesses you have to pay them more. Mm-hmm. If we reformed education so that our kids could walk out of high school if they wanted with a technical degree instead of with a degree that they could then go to college with. Say somebody walks out of Minneapolis North High School and you have 2 people, one person with a technical welding degree, one person with just the regular high school degree that we have now. The person with the welding degree is going to make $15 or $20 an hour. Person with just the regular high school diploma that we have is going to make $7.25 an hour, or they're ready to go to college, because that's what our high school is designed to do, to prepare every single kid to go to college. And not every kid is going to go to college. Mm-hmm. So the best answer is to return our system similar to what it was in the 50s and 60s, where kids could actually get usable skills. And I'm not saying that the current education isn't usable. What I'm saying is that not every student is going to go to a 4-year college or university. And if we do that, then kids, the dropout rate's going to decrease, because if you tell a kid who's likely to drop out, hey, you can walk out of school and be a welder for $15 an hour, or you can drop out and make the minimum wage the rest of your life, I think they're more likely to stay in school. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the kids that drop out, the other thing is a lot of those kids that I remember that dropped out or didn't do very well, they were the kids that were always playing with their car and tinkering on their car in the garage. Well, why don't we get them a mechanics degree so that they can make money doing that? And then they'd be less likely in the long run to use social services. Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a question, too, about MNsure and healthcare reform. It actually recently was published on the Star-Tribune. Dallas, if you can throw this article up. It says, Minnesota GOP hopefuls are split over the next step on MNsure. And basically, Republican businessman Scott Honor, he came out and strongly advocated replacing the state-run online marketplace with one that's managed by the federal government. And, the article goes on about how contrasting the various positions of the other Republican governor's candidates. So is Scott Honor right about his position here?
Well, I would say yes and no. I don't want to say yes, but the reality is, if we get rid of MNsure without any other changes, that's just what's going to happen. People will go off MNsure, and the federal law says that they have to buy insurance on an exchange, so they will have to go on to the federal exchange. We can't just get rid of MNsure and say, okay, you're on your own, go on the federal exchange. We need to try and return health care in Minnesota to the way it was before the Affordable Care Act. And even though there's a lot of misinformation, we have the best healthcare system in the world. For people that had a pre-existing condition, we had a pre-existing condition pool. If they were people with low income with a pre-existing condition, we would help pay for it as a state. Pretty much anybody in Minnesota that wanted insurance, that would take the personal responsibility to call Minnesota Care or medical assistance, could get insurance. And we have facilities like the University of Minnesota and the Mayo that would provide top-notch. In Minnesota, we didn't have the problem that some other states do, but the federal government tried to create a solution that would cover everybody, and it actually made things worse here. So, the answer to that question isn't as simple as yes and no. Yes, we need to get rid of MNsure, but we need to fight like heck to get back to the really high-quality system that we had.
And how is that possible?
Well, we just have to keep, fighting to get the right people in at the federal level. One of the things that I would support, and this is a little bit controversial, Article 5 of the Constitution says that if 2/3 of the state legislatures call for a constitutional convention, then you have to have a constitutional convention. Now, I've started to lose faith in the ability of the federal government to actually solve any of these problems. But as governor, I would start calling legislative leaders across the country, and in Minnesota, we'd start and I'd call across the country and say, call for a constitutional convention, because then we can get together and we can actually make some meaningful federal level changes that will help Minnesota. We can get term limits at the federal level. We can get a balanced budget amendment, and maybe, just maybe, we could do something about the Affordable Care Act that has reached its lowest level of approval among the people of the United States. And yet, nobody's saying, well, okay, this is a law that's not working. It's not popular. It doesn't appear that it's ever going to work. Even the unions, and I'm a proud union member, even the unions across this country are turning on the president because the Affordable Care Act is causing their insurance to get more expensive and to be, doctors to be less accessible.
And there's a pretty strong group of Republican candidates that are running for governor. Many people think that Mark Dayton is vulnerable because of some of his onerous taxes on businesses and some other things that he's been doing. Out of the candidates, not including yourself, which one do you feel like you relate to the best?
Boy, that's a tough question. I think on different issues, I relate to different people. Of course, I'm an outstate candidate, and so I have a lot in common with Marty Seifert. We think of a lot of the same issues. And so in that sense, I could say that I relate pretty well with Marty. But we all pretty much share the same things. I relate with all of the candidates. There are some minor differences. I happen to be a pro-union Republican, and the rest of the candidates are in favor of right to work, and so that's one. That's about the only difference that we have. What I've tried to do is be as cordial and as pleasant, and enjoy getting to know the other candidates, because the last thing we need is to start infighting and attacking each other.
No, but I do think that it would serve the delegates, people who are going to be voting for the endorsement, to kind of know a little more about what each candidate brings to the table.
Yeah.
Do you think any of the candidates that are running for governor right now, do any of them have a fatal flaw? They're basically dead on arrival in terms of the election?
Well, I have concerns. I got into the race in August 21st, and 4 of the other candidates were already in the race. If I thought that one of them would be able to beat the governor with 51% without help from an independent candidate, I probably wouldn't have got in. Some of them have legislative experience, and having that baggage and having some of those votes that they're going to have to answer for is going to be tough.
Yeah.
I'm not going to necessarily say anybody specific, but I'm a special education teacher from Hibbing, so when the press or when the Democrats look at finding something to use against me, what are they going to say? What a jerk, he works with disabled kids. That's pretty tough to attack, but the other guys are going to have a lot more exposure to attacks.
Yeah, and one of the criticisms I've heard of the former Speaker of the House, Kurt Zellers, was that he was the Speaker when Republicans historically took the majority of the Minnesota State House, held it for 2 years, and then lost the majority to the Democrats in Minnesota after that. And so a lot of people, I know that Sue Jeffers has gone on the record and saying that he's not fit to lead. Is Kurt Zellers fit to lead this state?
I think that Kurt would make a fine governor. He certainly would be better than the governor that we have. A lot of the things that Kurt is being blamed for are things that were out of his control. There was a lot of voter apathy on the Republican side. If you look at voter turnout in 2012, the counties that should have supported Republicans, people didn't show up. In the metropolitan area, voter turnout was over 70%. And there's not a ton, I would say, that could have done to get somebody, from an outstate, Polk County or, somewhere quite a ways away to get those people to show up. It was a tough year for Republicans.
And we had State Senator Dave Thompson. He was on the show, and he did pretty well in the straw poll. I think he finish second in the straw poll?
He finished second, yep.
One of the criticisms of Senator Dave Thompson is he's come out very strongly for right to work.
Yep.
Do you think that that's a fatal flaw that he has in terms of winning the governor's seat?
It's a concern. I wouldn't say fatal flaw. But the reality is there are 351,000 union members in Minnesota. There are over 1 million people in Minnesota that either are in a union, married to a union member, a retired union member, or the adult child of a union member. I think it's close to 1.2 million, actually. I don't remember the exact number. And this is a number of people that we as Republicans have really not tried to earn their vote. And yet they're some of the most conservative people in the whole state. They are pro-Second Amendment, they're pro-life, they want the government to stay out of their business, they want low taxes. But because they're afraid that the government is going to try, that Republicans are going to try and bring right to work and try and weaken the unions, I know people, they're probably more conservative than I am from up on the Iron Range, and they until I came along, wouldn't even consider voting for a Republican. And when I tell them, hey, I'm not in favor of right to work. I've been in a union for 16 years. My dad was in a union for 33 years.
Wow.
Yes, unions have problems. There are issues, especially when you go, to the leadership in Pittsburgh and Washington, D.C. But at the local level, they have proven historically to be a good thing, and that if you work, if management works with unions, it can be a good thing.
Yeah, one common distinction or maybe even misunderstanding is that Republicans are anti-union, and
Yep.
it's just like this blank check across the board that Republicans and conservatives despise unions. Some others will draw a distinction between the public union and the private sector union. My question for you is more along the lines of private sector unions.
Yep.
Are you in favor of imposing right-to-work laws on private sector unions?
No. And I don't think you need to. I think if you take the money out of it, which is, I'm an Education Minnesota member, and in 2012, my union dues were used to politically, to stop the voter ID amendment and to stop the marriage amendment. And my question is, as a union member, I pay union dues for the union to represent me as an employee, and all teachers do. Why are my dues being paid for things that are outside of that purpose? And I've talked to a lot of union members that feel the same way. And I think if you take that out of the equation, and if you just allow the local unions to do what they're supposed to do, then you don't need right to work. And the other thing is, human nature is flawed. Human nature has failed. And too often you hear Republicans say, well, if there's a good boss, you don't need a union. Well, the reasons we have unions are because there are so many not good bosses. And I was union president with the Department of Corrections at the local level for 2 years, and I sat across the table in meetings where one employee was disciplined for behavior and another employee was not disciplined for the same behavior just because they were friends with the supervisor. And that's the perfect example of why I think they're still valuable and can be used, because human nature isn't perfect. And unions, I think, are the best way in the workplace to deal with that.
One of the other candidates that did pretty well in the straw poll and has done strongly his entire campaign is Jeff Johnson,
Yeah.
The Hennepin County Commissioner, and he's also involved in the party and whatnot. He and others say that he's got a perfect conservative voting record. My question to you is, does he?
But by all accounts, he does. I haven't, we haven't researched his record, every single vote, vote by vote. But nothing has come out to indicate that he doesn't have a perfect record. But he was in the legislature when the Democrats were in control. And so, to claim that perfect record is it's kind of nice for him to be able to do, but you have to keep it in the context of the Democrats were going to do what they wanted to do anyway. But, on the other hand, and I like to look at everything on both sides, Tim Pawlenty was the governor, and so they did have to work together, and I think that's one thing that Jeff is good at is maybe even though he's my opponent, I shouldn't say good things about him, but, I like Jeff, and I think he is good at bringing people together.
The other question that I'm very curious on is, I wish I knew the actual study and I had it cited here, but I can't. But there was a study done, and Minnesota ranked at the very, very bottom in terms of entrepreneurial activity and starting new businesses. My question to you is, given the history, the great history of Minnesota and startup businesses, you could go on and on about Best Buy and Target and Dairy Queen and Honeywell and other just huge success stories. Why all of a sudden are we lacking in new startups and entrepreneurial activity? What is it that's changed from the 60s and the 70s to today?
I think the easiest answer to that, of course you have taxes and all of that, but it's not easy to get through the paperwork to start a business. Back in, I think it was either 1996 or 1997, my mom wanted to open a hair salon. She was a hairstylist and she was ready to go out, to go on her own. And just to open a small hair salon, she was, at the time, was only going to have 4 employees. That business grew to, I think, about 17 employees, but she was only going to have 4 employees at the time. And I couldn't believe the number of hoops they had to jump through. In fact, they had to go to the college. There's a small business group at the local college that helps guide people that want to start a business through all of the red tape. And it's mind-boggling to me that you would, in order to start a small business in this state, that you would have to go to some group that would help you navigate all of the paperwork. And if I had a great idea, would I start a business in Minnesota, or would I go somewhere that it's a lot easier? I like Minnesota, so maybe because I like it here, I want to raise my kids here, I would, but I can see why a lot of people would say, nope, I'm going to go over to North or South Dakota. They have lower taxes. It's only going to take me 30 days to get the permits that I need.
And what more can be done about that?
Well, you have to get rid of the red tape. Of course, you have to lower the taxes, and businesses are overtaxed, but you have to get rid of the red tape so that it's a lot easier for people to start businesses.
Now, do you think anything has to do with this? And Sam, Wayne Pierce, and I are going to talk about this after our meeting here, but Representative Keith Ellison, Minnesota's representative in Minneapolis and the surrounding area, he was recently on, what show was it here? Powerhouse Roundtable, and he was being asked about Obamacare and how the CBO had reported a huge reduction of hours and also potential loss of jobs. Well, Ellison went on and said, we are going to have parents being able to come home working reasonable hours. People are going to be able to retire. People might actually be able to cook dinner rather than have to order out and get takeout. Then he added, if you look at international comparisons, country by country, Americans work way more than the average industrialized countries around the world. And basically he said that it gives us the chance to look at our work-life balance, and he described this as a great opportunity. So my question is twofold. Do you believe what Congressman Keith Ellison is saying here, and that we're overworked and that we actually need to work less? And also, do you think that that's a good thing?
Of course, it's a huge surprise that I don't agree with the congressman. I'm not quite sure when in our history working hard became a bad thing, and working to have insurance became a bad thing. And my personal story, in 2002, my mom died. It was just she died suddenly. I moved home with my dad, and I couldn't find a teaching job. So I was subbing, but I didn't have insurance, so I started to work at the local grocery store. It was a union store, and they had insurance. It was a little humbling for me. This was 13 years ago. It was kind of humbling for me to be working at a grocery store after graduating with honors from St. Thomas. But that's what I did because I needed insurance. It was the responsible thing to do. And so, for the congressman to insinuate that working hard for something like that is an embarrassment or not a good thing, it's insulting, to people like me that have done that. And then if he wants to compare us to other industrialized countries, that's fine. We can do a full comparison. Their cost of living are, if they want to buy a home, it costs twice as much, or more than it does in most of the United States. Automobiles cost twice as much. Gasoline costs 3 times as much. So if he wants to do a full comparison, we certainly can do that. But most of those countries don't enjoy the quality of living that we do. And it's clear by his comments that he wants us to have the same quality of living that they do.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, I'm done.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, it's something that definitely creates a lot of worry inside of me, is this antipathy towards work and hard work and going out there and trying to make it. And
Yeah.
to me, it poses a very real threat to the American way of life. So I'm glad to hear your position stated so clearly on that one.
Well, and if he can compare us to France, because it sounds like the sort of society that he wants is the society that they have in France. And what France has is they perpetually have 8 to 10% unemployment. They've got 90% of the population that works to support that 8 to 10%. And they have youth unemployment that is almost the highest in the world, other than I think Greece is higher. There's a few countries that are higher. I'm not quite sure that is what the vision that anybody in America has for this country. For us to look like France. Okay, great, I only have to work 32 hours, but I can't afford to do anything because cars, a minivan costs $70,000 and a house costs $400,000. That's not really the dream that I have for my kids.
Well, Rob, I certainly appreciate you taking the time on this wintry day to come into the studio. And once again, everybody, Rob's website is robfarnsworth.org, and I'll spell that out for you. It's ROBFARNSWORTH.org. I'd invite you to go to his website, learn more about him, find out ways that you can help out his campaign or perhaps donate. Rob, is there anything else that you want to add while you're here?
Well, as long as I have a captive audience, please check out the website, look at the issues, and go to the donate page. I'm not a millionaire. I don't know, well, I know one millionaire, but he's not going to give to my campaign. I need everyday people, normal people that would like to see just a common sense middle class person in the governor's mansion.
Mm-hmm. And can you just talk a little more about, like, if someone were to donate like $5 or $10 or $20, where does that money go? Do you have a big staff you're paying?
We have a pretty nimble staff. It goes to my treasurer. The treasurer deposits it, and it gets. It's not like it goes into my personal bank account. And the nice thing is we qualify for the PCR, so that if anybody that hasn't already contributed to a candidate or to a party can get a refund of up to $50 per person. So, you could give to my campaign up to $50. If you can't afford $50, $20, $10, whatever. And the state of Minnesota has brought this program back, and it would be a full refund, so it's $50 per year per registered voter of Minnesota.
Sounds good. Well, Rob Farnsworth, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, best of luck with the campaign.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So that is Rob Farnsworth. It was great to have him here to learn more about who he is, what he stands for. It sounds like he's got a lot of great ideas. Again, his website is robfarnsworth.org. Invite you to go check it out. And now we're going to try to connect to Sam Wayne Pierce, if possible, here. And we're having some technical difficulties, but...
Hi, I'm Ellie McFadden. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my dad. Not the business guy, the real guy. My dad was raised in a middle-class family in Omaha, Nebraska. Growing up, my dad learned at a young age the value of hard work. Here he is on his paper route. Great hair, Dad.
Hi, I'm Mike McFadden, and I'd like to tell you a little about myself. My grandparents were farmers. My grandmother was actually from Owatonna, and my dad was the first one in his family to go to college. This is my mom in college. I think my dad outpunted his coverage.
And what he learned growing up shaped his values today.
In our house, it was all about family, faith, education, and of course, sports.
After working hard in high school, my dad went on to go to the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul to play football and further his academic career. That's when he fell in love with Minnesota.
Minnesota is a wonderful place with our lakes, our parks, our business community, the arts, our major league sports teams, and our most valuable asset, our people.
After graduating from St. Thomas, Dad went to work at IBM in Minnesota and eventually to law school at Georgetown. He also met Mom. Good move, Dad.
I met my wife, Mary Kate, at a bar in St. Paul called Tiffany's. It was love at first sight for me, but look at me. She needed some convincing.
Well, eventually he convinced her. Now they have 6 kids.
To me, family is everything. It provides the love, support, and foundation upon which to build. It's also the reason I got into coaching, to affect young people's lives, to give them the confidence that they'll need to be successful later on in life.
I'm proud of my dad. He makes Minnesota better. One way he does this is through helping to create hope. Hope for a lot of kids.
Education is something I'm very passionate about. I've had the good fortune to be a part of Crystal Ray Jesuit High School. Crystal Ray was founded 6 years ago with the mission to educate kids from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. Last year, 78% of our seniors went on to college. This year, 100% of our kids have been accepted into college. Our model works. It's truly a game changer, not only for these kids, but for their families.
I know my dad won't say this himself, but he's a pretty cool guy. I think my dad would be a great senator because he sees Minnesota's infinite potential. He dares to dream big. So I dare you. Get to know my dad.
As a father, business leader, and through my involvement at Crystal Ray, I have seen what we can do when we set our expectations high. We can truly accomplish great things. But I am very concerned about the direction this country is headed. We have a very stagnant economy and have amassed an enormous amount of debt, which will be passed on to our children unless something is done. Our education system is broken. We spend more money than any country in the world other than Switzerland, and we get subpar results. This is not acceptable. We need to set our expectations higher. We need to demand better. I will make sure this gets done. Join the team.
My name is Randy Gilbert, and I want to be Minnesota's next state auditor. I want to thank you for coming to my website and taking some time to watch this video. I also want to welcome you to my kitchen. Like many Minnesotans, the kitchen is much more than just cooking the meal for the day. In this kitchen, I do my taxes, plan my finances, and lately been thinking a lot about my campaign. As your next state auditor, I'll be in charge of overseeing $20 billion of your taxpayer dollars that's spent by 3,300 different taxing entities across the state. In order to be a good auditor, you must possess 3 important characteristics: knowledge, experience, and independence. I received my knowledge from the University of Minnesota Duluth, graduating with an accounting degree. Upon graduation, I started my professional career working for KPMG Pete Marwick, followed that up by McGladdery and Pullen. Currently, I'm an auditor with Assurance Consulting. During my 25 years of business experience, I've got to experience many great things. One of the most rewarding things was being elected mayor of Long Lake. Over the course of 3 terms of mayor, we did some great things, but the things I'm most proud of are that we reduced taxes, we eliminated Long Lake's reliance on local government aid, and we did those things without cutting one service that the citizens came to know and love. The most important thing for any good auditor is to be independent, and this should be important to you as well. I'm going to make a promise to you today. As your state auditor, I will not be influenced by any special interest groups. My only interest is you, the taxpayer, in protecting your hard-earned money. And the reports that we produce and put out will show that to you. We'll clearly tell you how your money is being spent, and you will gain a better understanding. Finally, I want to thank you for being a part of this process. And I hope that over the course of the next weeks and months, I get a chance to meet many of you. And in that meeting, that I may gain your trust, your support, and ultimately your vote this November. My name is Randy Gilbert, and I want to be your state auditor.
Hi, I'm Chris Dahlberg, with further proof that nobody looks good in a winter hat. But it keeps me warm as I go door to door, telling Minnesotans why I'm running against Senator Al Franken. This hat has a couple of other good uses too. The ear flaps block out those who say we can't fix the mess in Washington, D.C. I don't buy that. I'm a Republican who's been elected and re-elected in a heavily Democratic region by working with everyone to get things done. This hat also cushions a blow when we're banging our head against the wall because Congress is spending too much of our hard-earned tax dollars. Our national debt now is $17 trillion. That's more than $54,000 for every man, woman, and child in Minnesota. And yet Senator Franken wants to spend even more. Let's stop banging our heads against the wall, Minnesota. Let's bring focus and fiscal responsibility back to Washington, D.C. I'd be honored to be your next U.S. Senator. I can't wait till June so I can quit wearing this hat.
All right, so here's the topics that we were going to talk about nonetheless. The first one is the Olympics and everything that's going on in Sochi with that. We're also going to talk about the controversy that happened in Cedar Lake with the DFL there. Unbelievable is that you all heard about the ruckus at the caucus, and we connected to Sam.
You can hear, but we'll see how it goes.
Sam Pierce, can you hear me? Sam Pierce?
Hello, Minnesota.
Okay, we can hear you now. Yeah, we have some technical difficulties. I apologize for that, Sam.
No problem.
But so, as I was saying, we're just going to talk about our stories here. The first one I wanted to talk about, did you watch that big game last night?
This morning, I think you're talking about, Tony. You're talking about the
Was
US
it this morning?
game.
What time was it at?
Well, you had to get up early. You had to remember, it's over in Russia, so if you wanted to watch it live, you had to be up about, 8, Minnesota time, you probably had to be up about 7 o'clock this morning, Tony,
Wow.
to watch. So, but it was worth it if you got up in time to see it. The United States played Russia to a 2-2 tie. It went to overtime. Nobody scored. It went to a shootout. And 8 rounds deep into the shootout, the Americans prevailed, and they won 3-2. So it was nice to go beat Russia with Vladimir Putin there live in the arena watching.
Yeah, wow. And you got up that early to watch it, or were you already up?
Oh, Tony, we're old. I get up early every day, but yeah, I was up and I was watching, and it was awesome. It was thrilling. The game was billed to be a really big game, Tony, because of the USA-Russia rivalry, and it was one of those instances in sports where the game actually lives up to the billing. To go to a shootout, 8 rounds deep, and Tony, one of the things that I wanted to mention on the show today. So the hockey team, the men's hockey team, their roster has 25 guys, I believe, and 8 are Minnesotans, and that includes TJ Oshie from a place way up north in Minnesota called War Road, Minnesota.
Yeah, oh yeah.
He plays for the St. Louis Blues now in the NHL, and he was the American hero in the shootout. Shot the winning goal. So very good news.
Wow. Yeah. Did you said that Putin wasn't enjoying the game too much?
He wasn't too happy, and at one point there was a really controversial goal that the Russians had scored. The ref stopped the game, looked at the review, and the net had come up off the ice, so the goal didn't count. And that was a pretty controversial call, and Putin did not like that too much. Hopefully he doesn't send the refs or his players on the next train to Siberian exile.
That wouldn't surprise me if that happened, Sam. Do you know what the medal count is, Sam? How is the U.S. doing in comparison to the rest of the world?
Well, Tony, there have been a lot of events going on all day today, but I think the last updated count I saw was the Germans with 15, and I think the Russians may have 15, the U.S. 14, and the Germans may also have 14. The Norwegians were very high as well. The Germans were leading the gold medal count with 7.
You know, I've never been too big of a fan of the Winter Olympics. I always like the Summer Olympics more. It just seems like with the Winter Olympics, there are too many sports that don't really seem like sports. Am I alone in thinking that?
For the risk of sounding controversial, Tony, I've always thought that the Winter Olympics were kind of the rich kid sports. Most people can't play. Don't have the money for all of the equipment, for some of the fancy equipment for skiing and snowboarding and skating. And I think that the Winter Olympics is a much more limited pool of athletes, as opposed to, say, the Summer Olympics. Who doesn't want to line up and run the 100-yard dash and be the fastest man in the world?
Yeah, that's true. So, yeah, what else is it that we have lined up to talk about here, Sam? I got a little bit of flustered from our technical difficulties.
Well, me too. Over on this end, we'll have to work on that. But so, Tony, it's President's Day weekend here in the United States, and it also happened to fall on the same weekend as Valentine's Day. So I'm wondering, Does that mean Bill Clinton's going to end up in an Arkansas hotel room with Paula Jones, maybe?
It could be the
Well,
Bill Clinton special.
The Bill Clinton special. So let's talk about some other presidents and get into a little history just for fun here, Tony.
Sure.
It's President's Day weekend, and in the long history of the American presidency, would you say that you have a favorite?
Do I have a favorite president? I believe that I do. Who's yours first, though, Sam?
I think this is a tough question, and I think any good historian or author could make a case for a lot of them. So I'm going to start by saying, with all due respect to Madison, Monroe, Jackson, and even Reagan, I'm going to take Thomas Jefferson. I think you could.
Wow.
I think you could take Jefferson for a lot of reasons, Tony. I'm going to go. What I did when we talked about picking a favorite was I said, did any of the guys have to make just a monumental decision that was so important in the history of this country that I would say that sets them apart? An example might be Truman's decision to win the war with the bomb. I think Jefferson and his decision, which at the time wasn't an easy one, contrary to some revisionist history, his decision to purchase the Louisiana Territory and send Lewis and Clark and double the size of the country, which effectively kicked out Imperial France and prevented the British from maintaining such a dominant position in the North American continent. For that reason, I'm going to take Jefferson.
Wow. And, Benner, our good friend Dave Benner, the constitutional historian, he quite oftentimes he'll cite Thomas Jefferson when he's talking about the way the Constitution was drafted and the intent of the founders and so on and so forth. But wasn't that purchase at the time of the Louisiana Purchase, wouldn't Benner consider that way out of the scopes of the authority of the federal government and the constructs of the Constitution? Because didn't Jefferson have to borrow money in order to make that purchase?
Not only that, Tony, but he had to, in a hurry. Napoleon in France was fighting the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, and the French were really greatly overextended, but that's a whole other topic. But the French needed the money badly. So the idea that you're going to get Louisiana Territory for 3 cents an acre, and I think it was $15 million. I think it was $15 million at the time to double the size of the country. Not only was it a matter of who makes that decision, the president or Congress, but also once he went ahead, he had Madison in his cabinet assure the French that it was a done deal before Congress had even allocated the funds. So you can go back and look at it in a lot of different ways and revisit that. I think that most Americans would say it turned out pretty well, though.
Well, going back to your question for me, who I think the greatest president of all time, or my favorite president, I should say, I'm going to have to say President John F. Kennedy. And the reason for it is I believe that he gave this country hope. I really admire the fact that he was a younger president. Maybe, was he the youngest president to be sworn in to this day, Sam? Do you know if that's true or not?
That's right, Tony. And he certainly brought a lot of that youthful energy to the presidency. A lot of people credit that with, and the way that he was so youthful and energetic on TV with Nixon, the first real televised debate. Has become folklore in American history, that people that heard the 1960 debates between Nixon and Kennedy on the radio thought Nixon won, but those that watched on TV fell in love with Kennedy.
Wow, that's interesting. And what I also admire about President Kennedy was towards the latter part of his career as president, it seemed to me that he was focusing in on some pretty big issues. He was starting to focus in on monetary policy, foreign policy. He started questioning some of the reasons we were purportedly going to war and why people wanted to go to war, especially in Vietnam. And he showed a lot of signs of courage and a willingness to bring certain things to light that perhaps people didn't know about. But then, of course, he was assassinated before he was really able to reach the apex of his career and his influence as president. But for those reasons, for mainly the reasons of courage, I put forth President John F. Kennedy Jr. to be my favorite president of all time. What's the next question now?
So Tony, there's always, or at least to this point, we haven't had a female president yet. We will someday, but at this point, it's been the president and always the first lady. And America's had a lot of wonderful first ladies. Is there one that you thought that sticks out to you, maybe classiest or most character, or politically active, or supports the best causes? What do you have to say about the first lady?
So you're asking me who I think the classiest first lady of all time is?
Sure.
I'd have to say, I'd have to go with Michelle Obama. And the reason for that is, A, she's the first African-American first lady of all time. B, I think she holds the office with dignity. I think she's got great style. Sometimes she gets a little bit of heat for wearing $12,000 dresses, but she looks great in them. She looks stately. I love the way that she represents our country to the rest of the world. And finally, what I admire most about her is her initiative against childhood obesity. People might say, hey, that's not the role of the First Lady, or she shouldn't be doing that. And I absolutely disagree with that. We need people going out there and advocating for a healthier lifestyle, for eating right, for exercising, for doing those types of activities, because that's how people are influenced in large part, are by their role models. And finally, I think she's a great role model as a mother too. I think their family and her two daughters, I think, are lovely daughters, and again, they represent our country well, despite some of the policies that they may represent. How about you, Sam? Who's your all-time?
First, excellent choice on Michelle Obama. Agree with everything you said, and especially love her Let's Move campaign. Let's get kids active and fight childhood obesity. It's a problem. I don't know how anyone can say it's not. So Tony, you went with the second First Lady of the 21st century. I'm going to go way, way back, and I'm going to take the second First Lady of the 18th century, Abigail Adams. So the First Lady was Martha Washington. She was very quiet and behind the scenes, and Abigail Adams was not so much. She was very politically active, and to the point that some of her critics kind of jokingly called her Mrs. President. She was an early advocate for women's rights, and she was staunchly anti-slavery, to the point that she had a lot of writings in opposition of Virginia and some of the southern colonies in the Revolution, because she said, how can they be as much for liberty as we are in the northern colonies when they enslave people? So she was very outspoken and a close confidant of John Adams, her husband. So she's always been historically very important to me.
Good one. What's next on the list?
So Tony, just like the First Lady can be behind the scenes and sometimes is not, you could say the same thing about the Vice President. Did you think that there was one that was maybe more impactful than the others, either historically or even in our lifetimes?
Vice President. So you're asking me who do I think the most influential Vice President has been of all time?
Sure.
I'd have to go with, on that one, although I disagree with a lot of the actions this person took and a lot of the influence that he made, I'd have to go with Vice President Dick Cheney. I think that he probably, out of all the vice presidents that I know about anyways, was able to conjure up the most amount of power and the most amount of influence on foreign policy, on domestic policy, on a whole other things over President Bush. What do you think about that, Sam?
Certainly influential. I've never been a big fan of Vice President.
No, I'm not a big fan of him either.
I'll leave it at that. When I looked at this question, when we talked about some questions for the show today, I went with another older pick, and that's John C. Calhoun, South Carolinian from the early 19th century. Held a lot of different positions, not just vice president, but what was interesting about him was he was vice president under two different presidents, John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, two very different presidents that he was the vice president for. he, much like you, it's interesting that you brought up Benner, our constitutional scholar who's been on the show a lot. Calhoun was a proponent of the legal theory of nullification way back when, much like Jefferson and Madison. And I think he's very important because as people start to talk about states' rights again in this country, and Mr. Farnsworth was on today talking about maybe the need for a states' convention. John C. Calhoun was a big proponent of nullification way back when, that says that the states don't have to just take federal law for just because the federal government says so. And for that reason, I went ahead and picked Calhoun as someone that I thought was maybe the most influential vice president of all time.
Interesting.
So Tony, Cheney and Calhoun are two guys that were influential as VPs. They were never presidents. If you could have seen anyone in American history that never became president become president, who would you pick?
That's a good question. So you're asking me who's the greatest president that never was?
Essentially, yeah.
I think I'd have to go with two. First one would be Bobby Kennedy, who, of course, President Kennedy being one of my favorite presidents. I think that Bobby Kennedy, especially in the aftermath of the tragedy that happened with his family and things that were going on in the country at that time with Vietnam and some other things that were going on domestically, I think that Bobby Kennedy could have been the man that maintained unity within our country. But he was tragically shot as well in the stomach in that famous scene. The other president, the best president that never was, I think Ron Paul was probably another good one to be in that category. I mean, he had some ideas that a lot of people thought were nutty, far-fetched. He was a strict constitutionalist. And, I always in the back of my head wonder, what would our country be like right now today if Ron Paul would be president?
Tony, I never found him nutty. I thought that the biggest critique I had against him, and I hate to say this, I actually registered briefly as a Republican in New York State in 2012 so that I could vote in the primary here, and voted for Ron Paul. I would say the biggest critique is I thought he almost came across as too smart for America. I say that sadly. As far as Bobby Kennedy goes, what I remember about, well, we weren't alive, but what I've read and actually seen the clips of him on Meet the Press, what I found so compelling and interesting and astounding about him, he was willing to stand up to LBJ and went on national TV and said he was going to run, even though there was an incumbent sitting president in his party. Can you imagine if a Democrat in 2012 said, you know what, I'm going to run against Obama? And Bobby Kennedy was so principled and he was so anti-Vietnam War that he was willing to do that. I thought that was pretty special.
Yeah, that is pretty amazing. Takes a lot of courage. And Sam, we're almost out of time here. Should we do the last one?
Tony, if you could pick a president who was most successful what he did was most successful outside of the presidency, who would you pick?
The most successful outside of the presidency?
That's right.
I don't know. I need to think about this one for a little bit longer. President Ronald Reagan was pretty successful outside the presidency. But Sam, that's all the time that we have with our show. And we thank everyone for tuning in to the Tony Hernandez Show. We broadcast live every Saturday from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. May God bless you. May God bless America. And vaya con Dios.